All right, we are live. Hey, everybody, it's Steve Sabaker with Enlightened Omnivore. Super excited to have my friend Katerina here today. Katerina, where are you in the world?
I am in North Wales, so yeah, in the UK, that is. Somewhere near Bangor, if that near Conwy Castle, in a little outside a little rural town called Llanrwst, one of those Welsh town names that look like the letters can impossibly be in that order, but
Awesome. It's so great to have you. I'm here in sunny Southern California, just back from a massive road trip I just did with my family. Excited today for our live conversation. Katerina and I are going to talk about, the fears of cooking and how to be a more intuitive cook, which I think is going to be a really exciting conversation. Katerina talks a lot about this in her Substack, Think Like a Cook and her website, The Intuitive Cook. I hope you guys check those out. But yeah, while we're waiting for folks to show up, I thought I'd share a little bit about my summer adventures. Just got back actually from the Adirondacks. I was in upstate New York, which may be as far north as Wales. I'm not sure, but it's getting up there. And did some canoeing with a group of friends who I've been exploring the Adirondacks with for the last 5 years. They've been going for over a decade. Just a beautiful part of the world that I knew nothing about before I started going back in 2022. And so we did 4 days and 3 nights of canoeing and portaging, carrying our canoes on our head between lakes and then canoeing through these beautiful lakes in the north of the United States. Just a beautiful forested wet, very wet and buggy part of the country, but had a blast doing that. And just before that, I was on a 2.5 week road trip. Some of you may remember I wrote about the green drive-through, basically the quest to find a more environmentally responsible and delicious option when you're eating on the road. So I dragged my family across the Midwest to visit extended family of ours and a couple colleges for my daughter. And then we ended up in Rhode Island. And along the way, we stopped at 10 of the most popular fast food or fast casual spots that are making an attempt at being a little more environmentally responsible and sustainable. And so I'm going to be writing about that in the coming weeks, which should be a lot of fun. And actually next week I'll have some kind of my top choices of the places we ate. Did you do any summer travel, Katerina?
I did my usual summer travel. I'm from Greece originally, so I go back every summer. These days, it's more like taking care of my mum, but I still took her to the island where we have a summer house, so where, she's spent the last 50 years of summers. And so I did get to dive in the sea, and eat some fish. So that's always great. But
Awesome.
yeah,
It's great to see Peter. We've got Peter and Andy joined. Awesome to see you guys. Thanks for being here. And as always, remember to post if you have questions or comments. You can post those at the bottom of the screen, and we'll see them and we can answer those. Today, we're going to be talking about intuitive cooking. We're also going to be sharing a little bit about how, there's this fear of cooking in the United States. I think a lot of Americans are intimidated by the kitchen. And Katerina writes beautifully about some of the things we can do to allay those fears and to better prepare us for the kitchen and empower us in the kitchen. And then we're going to put that to a test. We're going to have a little game of, I'm going to go into my own kitchen here, my refrigerator here at the Mirepoix Studios, where I'll be pulling out items that are in my, common items that are in your refrigerator, and Katerina is going to help share how we think about these ingredients and how we might be able to cook with them in different ways. Because one of the things about being an intuitive cook is it's kind of like a game of Iron Chef every day, where you open that fridge and like, what am I going to make for dinner? That's the big question. And so we're going to be seeing if I can stump the intuitive chef with some of the ingredients in my fridge. And then, Katerina, you're going to do a cooking demonstration today?
Yeah, I had a bunch of green beans, so I thought I'll do a sort of Greek version of green beans. Because, that is what I think about when I have a bunch of green beans, because I think we all use our food memories, our backgrounds, our food experience to decide what's for dinner. And I think the more we kind of consciously make use of that big file of food memories we all have to help us decide, what's for dinner when we open the fridge. I think that is really a useful thing. And we all have that file of food memories. It's just that a lot of us don't put them to use properly.
And that's a great segue into I'm really curious how you define being an intuitive chef. Is it part of that, like recollecting your childhood, your upbringing, watching family members cooking, and then applying that in real life? Or how do you define being an intuitive chef?
Well, I'll start with saying I do not call myself a chef because I have no culinary training. I've just been cooking all my life. I remember making a 3-course meal for my family when I was 8, just because.
What'd you cook?
I remember making blini of all things.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which, yes, I did find in a recipe book. And it was something unusual to try. I don't remember what else I made, but it was like a proper 3-course meal. And yes, for some reason we made blini. I don't know. I've just always been watching my parents cooking, and my mum was a working mum, so it wasn't that we had all these kind of chefy meals at home. It was more about enjoying food and enjoying playing with flavors, and at the same time letting simple food be enough. So, and I just grew up with this, and I never really thought much about it until I actually moved to London in my 20s. And I suddenly was thrown into this cult of the recipe and, all these sort of celebrity chef culture. And I thought, for a while, it sort of did give me some insecurities, because I thought, well, maybe I'm not a good cook after all if I can't follow a recipe for the life of me. Mm-hmm. Regardless, though, anybody who came and ate my food was loving it. So, how do you reconcile that? And I think maybe this is where I think, in Britain, certainly, and in America, and, I think increasingly also in other cultures, it has gone wrong, because, why are chefs our role models? I mean, nothing against chefs, but cooking in a restaurant for paying patrons cannot possibly be the measure of cooking at home for your family. I mean, these are like two different things. And suddenly you have to have chefy aspirations in order to be, called a proper cook. And I think this is where it sort of goes wrong, because you can be a good cook without being chefy. And
what
indeed,
like? Yeah, what does that look like? Because I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't feel like I love your comment too about kind of the cult of the recipe, but also the cult of the celebrity chef that came up through the 90s and the early 2000s. And my cooking experience was very similar to yours, where I just started cooking out of a curiosity at a pretty young age, or out of a necessity, because I was a latchkey kid, and if I wanted to eat something other than cold cereal out of a box, I better get creative. But I didn't have the expectations that it was going to be delicious or amazing. And I feel like today, young people who start to cook, they have all of this content out there online that looks perfect and that gets lots of likes and praise, but you can never taste any of it. You never know what it tastes like. And so what are some of the things that you feel are most challenging for young people today who want to cook?
I think all that content out there is a problem, because I mean, most of that content, and especially anything that comes from an actual chef channel, or you find in recipe books, I mean, all this has been shot in a complicated camera shoot that lasted all day long. And, I've been told from people who have been on these shoots that, sometimes the food isn't even properly cooked, because, properly cooked food kind of doesn't hold itself that well. So I think we're all fooled by what it should look like. And obviously I would expect that anything anybody cooks should be tasty, because I mean, what makes food worth eating? It's enjoying the food. So therefore it really needs to be tasty. But not every meal needs to be the most amazing thing you've ever eaten in your life.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of measuring sticks we're measuring ourselves against are really stacked against us. So we just, very likely to feel like failures, which is completely unnecessary. Because, getting a tasty meal on the table doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to take long, and it really is not that difficult. But we get lost in all those chefy details. I mean, this is something one of my students said, who found me and said, I was attracted to the idea of ease without having to go to culinary school, which is, this is the impression you get, that in order to, cook something nice, you have to be some sort of chef, and this is just not true. You can cook good food without being a good cook, whatever a good cook means.
So do you feel like there's the biggest barrier for people to take up cooking is that fear of failure, a fear of not measuring up, or what are some of the biggest barriers?
Yeah, I think we are conditioned to constantly looking for the failure, because we already feel that we can't possibly measure up to all these chefs out there who show us how it should be done. Why is not your aunt or your grandmother your role model?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be chef so and so? And why is it? I mean, how has it come to that? And so I think we're already set up to compare ourselves to something it's just unfair comparison, because it's like comparing apples with oranges. Restaurant food is restaurant food, and that's great, but it's not a family dinner. And I think we're just so afraid of getting it wrong, and this whole culture of outsourcing our judgment to the experts, whether that's a chef or a nutritionist, that it's almost like a learned helplessness. Like, I can't possibly know how much salt this soup needs, which is absurd, because, you can taste the soup and decide how much salt is right for you, because again, taste is a very personal thing, and whatever might, taste, whatever combination of flavors, or how much salt or how much acid something takes is very personal. So, I don't want to tell you how much salt to put in. And this is another thing that happens so often in my classes. Like, the most frequent question I hear is like, we're cooking together. That's what I often do in my classes. And people say, well, can I really do that? Like, why not?
Why not? Yeah. Yeah, and that sense of permission, I think, is such an important concept. There is this the sacredness of recipes. That somehow, oh, if it's written down, I have to follow it. And then when do you get the permission as a cook, or in your own home, to just go off and into a different direction and ignore part of the recipe? And people, I think, are nervous to do that, which is understandable. I mean, you don't want to ruin your food. You don't want to, food costs a lot more these days. You don't want to deviate too much from a recipe and have it not taste good when it gets to the table. But what do you think it is about permission? I mean, are we just, maybe it's a different kind of person. Some like to follow the rules, some don't. What do you find amongst your clients and your students?
Well, I don't know. Some people certainly like following rules, and that's okay. I mean, they can go and have their, planned out meal plans and shopping lists to the gram. And if anybody's happy doing that, that's great. But, the people who come to me are usually the people who feel that this is just all either too overwhelming or too restricting. Like,
yeah.
They still, people who are extremely, say, creative in all their other endeavors, but it somehow doesn't occur to them that you can also, be creative while you're cooking. And I think it's just because nobody has ever said, well, why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you said that, oh, we're afraid of ruining our dinner, which is true. But, and we all love talking about kitchen disasters. There is this obsession with, the tales of the kitchen disasters. But, I mean, what is the worst that can really happen? I mean, yes, you can burn something to the point of it being inedible, but that doesn't make you a bad cook. That just makes you a distracted cook. and apart from that, it's actually, it's very easy to make something that is less than perfect, whatever perfect means, but it's also very hard to make something that's not edible. Cooking is a lot more forgiving than we are made to believe. And in my shop, I've been running a whole food shop for the last 10 years. So I have conversations about ingredients and recipes and what can you use or not or whatever every day. And often, people come in and say, oh, I tried this new recipe and it didn't quite work out that well. And I always like asking, well, what went wrong? And I mean, most of the times what goes wrong is that it's somehow boring.
Yeah.
And it's mostly boring because you probably followed the recipe rather than your own taste, because I mean most recipes are made to, please everyone. They're not made to please you. And most recipes are middle of the road because that reason that, so it's all very well to take inspiration from a recipe. And, I have a lot of recipe books, but, I read them like in bed, like novels. And, I sort of look through and I go, ooh, that sounds really nice. And I want to try that. And it always fascinates me, like what makes us leaf through a recipe book or scroll through all these recipes and stop at one recipe and not the other? What is it that catches your attention? And it's going to be something different for you than it is for me. And, there is something like what kind of flavors light you up, and to kind of really use that to guide you in your cooking. I think this is what it is about. And when you stop trying to do it right, it's just become so much more enjoyable and so much more easy because you're not trying to get it right.
So then, how do we go from following the recipe to taking some risks, using our intuition, getting creative, substituting an ingredient? Like is that what you're talking about in terms of giving yourself permission to do that, or what are some of the easy, if I'm a first time cook, or if I'm a person who only cooks with a recipe, which could be furthest from the truth for me. I don't even know. I have a lot of cookbooks, but I don't know how many I've read. Actually, The Joy of Cooking I used to read as a kid, and because that was the fundamentals. But the creative side that you're talking about, where you get inspired by something and you want to go into the recipe, when do you encourage your students to deviate from the map, if you will?
I would always say, start where you are. So, cook something you're familiar with and just change one thing and see what happens. And I think the see what happens, the noticing, is really important here because, again, we are used to look at the recipe to check rather than look at the pot to check.
Yeah.
And I think, and if you add more salt, or if you add a stick of celery that wasn't in the recipe, or you add an extra swirl of cream or whatever, what happens? Notice what happens and notice what you like and what you don't like. I mentioned food memories earlier. If you eat something, whether you cooked it or it was in a restaurant or on holiday, when you like something, what is it that you like? And when you don't like something, what is it? What didn't go that well? And when we kind of take note of these things, then we can use it more, intentionally next time.
One of the things I feel like a lot of Americans are, the barrier to them taking up cooking is that they feel it's less convenient than just ordering takeout or microwaving something, quickly. And a lot of my friends are like, oh my gosh, you're going to create so much mess and it's going to take so much time. I mean, personally, I can see if you're a single person that might be true, where you could, even though the quality might not be as good, you could microwave a meal pretty quickly in a few minutes and have something on the table with minimal mess. I find with 4 or 5 people in the house, that's not true. I mean, if we were each microwaving our own meal, it would be 20 or 30 minutes before everything was preheated. And I think even Michael Pollan did this once in his house, where he ate, microwave meals for a week and then cooked for a week. And it was actually cheaper and faster to cook. What do you say to people when they question the convenience of cooking at home?
Well, I think one is that I think the thinking about cooking is creating a lot more stress and taking up a lot more time than the cooking itself. When you become more used to improvising, I don't think about dinner all day. I have a kitchen stocked with some basics that can always be used for this or that or the other. And then I've got some fresh stuff in the fridge that, may need to go or I might fancy today. And I open the fridge and I cook. I'm not spending but I know that a lot of people are stressing all day about what's for dinner. And I think that takes up so much brain space and so much time, and this idea of getting organized and making a plan and a shopping list and then you still don't have the ingredient that the recipe says. So I think unchaining yourself from the dictate of the recipe is one of the ways to make it easier and simpler. And then the other thing really is, what is your priority? If your priority is convenience, I'm not going to sort of convince you otherwise, but then you're probably not listening to this live either. So I think like, this idea that you want to get cooking out of the way, to get dinner out of the way, to do what? Go and scroll on your phone or watch television. Like, what if the evening is the dinner?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As in, getting together with your family and sitting around the table and enjoying the process of cooking before enjoying the process of eating. I think it's a matter of getting away from this whole convenience thing. But obviously, this convenience marketing is very insidious because, again, we have been trained to see that, cooking is the obstacle to eating. So we better outsource it to some company that has, provided you with a packaged thing that is convenient, but, it's the consuming versus creating thing. In the end, we all have had the experience of what the satisfaction of, sitting down to something you have cooked yourself.
Right, right. Absolutely. I want to thank a couple of more folks who've joined us while we were chatting. It's Steve Sabaker here, Enlightened Omnivore, with Katerina Pavlakis. There we go. I got it. And thanks, Sandy, for joining us. Kurt, Julie, Sinu, really, really appreciate you being here. I want to segue into a little game that we're going to play now, where we're going to go into my own refrigerator and I'm going to pull out a few ingredients and see if I can stump Katerina on what she might do with them. Because this is a very common experience, in my house, is like, I can't remember where I put my car keys, but I know exactly what's in my refrigerator all the time. It's a little bit obsessive. But for most people, it's a very common thing to just walk into the kitchen, it's dinner time, and you got to be like, what am I going to make for dinner? And you open up the fridge. And so I thought, okay, I'll open up the fridge and I'll come up with an item. And like the first thing, here is like, I've got some eggs and some feta cheese. So what can I do with this? How do you go about thinking about what you would make with some feta and eggs?
When I was a kid, my mum used to make scrambled eggs with feta cheese. And that was an age where I didn't really like eggs that much. So I really needed the feta cheese to kind of cover up the taste of the eggs. And while I'm not doing that anymore, I often add feta cheese to a frittata. And a frittata is one of my go-to easy meals. You kind of soften up some vegetables, then you mix in some eggs and some cheese.
There you are. Sorry, right. You broke up for a second there, but the frittata is one of your favorite meals, you said?
Yeah, because it's just such a sort of, it doesn't require a lot of brain space. You just soften up some vegetables in a pan with olive oil, whatever vegetables there may be.
Whatever's in the fridge, yep.
Then you kind of crumble or grate some cheese and mix in some eggs and then you put it in the oven until, golden. And so that's what I would do with feta and eggs.
Fantastic. I love that. I find that the same thing goes for quiche. Like you kind of you throw, I call it a garbage quiche, where I just throw any vegetables that are about to go bad, into a pan, saute them up, and then put them in a quiche. It's great.
And this is also something interesting that I like. Sorry for the tangent here, but, to think of how these are different dishes, but somehow they're all similar.
Yeah.
Like, a frittata is, a quiche is like a frittata with a pastry base. Or, you could call a frittata like a pastryless quiche, if you like.
Exactly.
And a shakshuka is kind of the inversion of a frittata. Rather than having the veg mixed into the eggs, you have the veg and then you poach the eggs in the veg. Uh, and there is also a version where you that is not poached, but there is a version of yogurt of Turkish eggs. I think it's called silber, where you have a base of spiced yogurt and you put the poached eggs on top.
Right,
So
right.
so these are all, in a way, my brain always looks for the patterns. So while they're different, they're also somehow similar. And
All
I
right, I've got
think,
another one for you. You ready?
okay,
All right, sweet potatoes and cilantro.
well, cilantro is just a nice herb. And as far as, I'm concerned, herbs always add a lot of flavor and freshness to anything. So I think I would just either bake or just saute the sweet potato in some olive oil or some butter and put some spices in and finish off with some cilantro and probably something to contrast the sweetness, maybe some lemon or some chili sauce, something like that. Well, that's a classic, isn't it? Just, you know, mix sardines with hot sauce, and whether you just put the sardines on a plate and you know douse in hot sauce, or whether you make put it through a blender and make sardine pate with hot sauce, or any combination of that. But I think the fattiness of the sardines is calling for some contrast, and hot sauce is a nice contrast. And I think thinking in terms of what kind of dimensions are you building in your dish, especially when it comes to flavor. Like, really tasty food is multidimensional. Like, a good glass of wine, you want it to have be multidimensional, not one dimensional, kind of flat bland. You also don't want it to be like in your face. So you think of layers, and one of the important layers to create that depth of dimension is contrast. And contrast could be acid, or it could be something really salty and briny like olives, or it could be hot sauce. I think, I mean, obviously, that I love kind of slow cooked zucchini as a pasta sauce. So you cook the zucchini until they kind of start melting with lots of herbs or pesto or something, and then obviously the parmesan is just the extra bit. But also, grated parmesan is a great way of making things crispy in the oven. So you could also slice the zucchini and add some spices and some parmesan and bake it until the cheese melts, and when it cools down a bit, you'll have these crispy baked zucchini. So that's another thing, you know. I, I would braise them together. So, fennel is also really nice when it's sort of braised in butter or olive oil until it kind of really gets soft and silky. And I would just probably start with the fennel and then sit the pork chops on top and stick it in the oven. I often do that. I will just, or, sometimes I do braised fennel and stick a kind of fillet of fish on top. So that is, yeah, that's what I would do. I love braised fennel. Um, yeah, and I think I would probably think Thai salad. I don't know how kind of authentic red onion is in a Thai salad, but when I think of sort of fruity flavors in a sort of savory dish, I often think of Asian cooking, because in Asian cooking you often have this riot of flavors where it's salty, sweet, hot, all at once. So I'd probably think, something like a noodle salad with raw mango and raw onion and, I don't know, fish sauce and peanuts or something like that. Well, if, start with appreciating that if you can look at a recipe and not follow it completely, you're already using some of your intuition, or call it judgment, or call it common sense, or call it your own taste. In the end, it's all very similar. How we're gonna call it, and I think the more you pay attention in what you did by your own judgment, by your own taste, the more you can kind of exercise that muscle, because I think we need that experience of successfully doing something out of our own, agency, to say, well, I'm not gonna add this, or I'm gonna add this extra thing, or I'm gonna add more of this, and really pay attention to what happens. And it's all information, even if you end up thinking, oh, well, that wasn't such a good idea, that's not failure. That's just information that is feeding your intuition, your judgment, your own taste. I don't know, one really interesting thing in a class I had was, a situation, we're cooking something together. So my student Noel was, I can't remember what it was. So like, oh, it now needs something. And then it's like, so, you already recognizing it needs something, but you feel too unsure to trust yourself with what does it need. So for example, what we then did is like, okay, what spices have you got? Okay, these three things. Okay, open the spice jar, sniff the spice, then sniff your pot and trust your experience. And it was really interesting because it was three different spices. The first one, he went, no. Like he was really clear that absolutely I don't want to add this, and it wasn't even something strange. I would probably have added it, but it was his dinner. Second one, no. Third one, yeah, I'm going to add this, and oh yeah, and now I think it's complete. So it may seem too simple, but this is where it is. This is how we train our intuition, our judgment, our own taste. And it's about learning to trust that, because it's there. You already have your taste buds, and even if you haven't cooked a single thing in your whole life, you have been eating all your life. So you kind of know what tastes good. And there is this wonderful quote from Tamar Adler from her Everlasting Meal book, where she says somewhere, you don't need to know what it's supposed to taste like. It's supposed to taste good. And that's the thing. And when you taste something, you know what tastes good and what doesn't taste good, like her direction for, when are your beans done? When you taste one bean and you have the urge to have another, then it's done, and so, but we're not used to doing that, so we really need to practice that. So I think that's what it's about. Yes, let's try and do some cooking. And I'm going let me just put a cable onto my phone, because it appears to be eating up the battery really very fast. Yeah, well, I don't know where this orthodoxy has come from, because I mean, if you look back on human history, people would have cooked with what they had. And it's also, there is this saying about, there is as many recipes as cooks. And this is often, applied specifically to iconic dishes where every family will have their own version. So I'm not entirely sure where exactly, you know, this orthodoxy is coming from, because I mean, adapting to what is available has always been at the heart of cooking. I mean, when you grow your own food, you cook with what is available, and you do your whatever beef stew or potato stew. And yes, a beef stew requires beef and potato stew requires potatoes, but what else you put in is probably, this or that, depending. So, yes, so I hope the sizzling doesn't get too loud. So I got a bunch of green beans. So I thought I'll just make Greek style green beans. And well, it turns out they're not just Greek style. I'm just knowing them from Greece. But I had a conversation with Sinu recently about how green beans, kind of stewed in tomato, are such a Mediterranean thing that you can find all over the Mediterranean and, possibly into the Middle East. I don't know. So, and it's very different to, in Britain, green beans or peas are basically being, either boiled or steamed. If you're lucky, there will be some garlic with it. And adding the tomato just and other things to it makes it just so much more tasty. So when I see green beans, I always think of the tomato version. But in in this instance, well, I would say I don't think it matters. Use whatever tomatoes you have, and if you don't have fresh tomatoes, use a tin or use tomato paste. Or so in this case, I chose the tomatoes that are going really soft because I keep the nicer ones for the salad, and the ones that are, already looking a bit questionable, they're just perfect for adding to, any kind of stew thing. So I've got some onions sizzling here, and I'm adding some cubed potato, and I'm cubing it just because I want it to cook quicker. So that's one of those things to, we read in a recipe, slice the onion or chop the onion finely or cube the potatoes or, make them the thickness of a pound coin or whatever. And and we just often just take that as okay, whatever. I'm just going to follow that. But it's really interesting to understand why. What difference does it make? So the smaller you chop something, for example, the faster it cooks. When you're aware of that, you can use that. Like if I'm really in a rush, I'm going to chop things smaller. Or if I'm making a stir fry that, is meant to cook quickly, but I want to add carrot, I might, grate it or kind of slice it into, spirals with a potato peeler or something like that. So when we stop to think why we're doing something or what effect that has, I think this is how we learn. And often, recipes that are well written might have little hints like that. And I think again, if we're looking for how to generalize, like, oh, that little hint about this recipe chopping the onion really small or whatever is part of this recipe, but you could then use it in something else. Yeah, and I mean, so many things. Like when you add, there is a reason why most recipes start with chop an onion, and this is because you're creating a flavor base, like a background depth of flavor. It's not that you're trying to make the dish taste of onions, and it's not going to taste of onions. It will disappear into the flavor. And adding a bit of lettuce or adding a bit of carrot or an extra celery stick is only going to add to the overall flavor. It's not going to, materially change the dish unless chuck in the whole head of celery, of course. But I'm sort of throwing in stuff, so I've probably doing it a bit quicker. I probably would normally, I don't know, does that show? So, yeah, so I've got onions, potatoes, the beans, and now I'm putting in the tomatoes that are going to also provide some juice. Um, and and then I'm probably start thinking, what kind of, and I'm adding, just sprinkling in salt as I go, sort of in layers as well. Like, put a little bit with the onions, and then put a bit as I put in the tomatoes, and then probably I'll, taste at the end. And when I first read that concept of salting from the inside in Sami Nosrat's book, the iconic salt, fat, acid, heat, I had not come across this concept before of salting from the inside, but it just made so much sense to me that if you just put the salt in at the end, it just sits on top. Mm-hmm. So if you salting a little bit as you go and it incorporates into the food, in a way you will need less salt overall, if that's something you're worrying about. And the other thing, of course, with the salt is that because salt is bringing out the flavor, the more flavorful ingredients you already have, the better your tomatoes, the less salt you're going to need to bring things out. And this is, again, why, the data says that 60% of average salt intake of the average person comes from processed foods. So if you are worried about salt, and I'm not one of the people who worry about salt, but if you're worried about salt, the way to cut down on salt is cut down on processed foods, not to stop adding seasoning to your cooking. And that's one of my pet peeves. This idea of making us all afraid of salt makes all this processed stuff so yummy and addictively Moorish, while our own home cooked stuff, when we're afraid to salt to taste, is just bland, because that's what salt does. It brings out flavor. And it kind of perpetuates this idea that, home cooked food is never as tasty as the stuff from the packet, which is just obviously not true. Yeah, what's new? I think what's new is that I'm trying to move one level deeper and to, talk more about how important it is to notice what's happening in your pot. And we talked about this earlier because this is how we hone our intuition by noticing and then responding. And this is where, the agency happens rather than waiting